So yeah, I was given this book like what 3 years ago, 4 years ago.
I don't know. I wasn't there.
4 years ago.
And I was given this book about 4 years ago, and I've never read it. It's Ready Player One.
Watch this. You ready? How was it?
I'm not number 5 or Doctor Who, so I can't do that.
It was The Butler.
I just never bothered to pick it up, but you know, with the movie having come out this weekend, which I haven't seen, I was thinking about the concept of, you know, the number of book adaptations that are made in Hollywood, and you know, the old adage, well, I don't want to read the book, I'm going to wait till the movie comes out, or the other one saying the book was better than the movie. And I just thought, well, given that Ready Player One has come out this weekend, I thought it'd be an interesting discussion, you know, of all these movies, you know.
Well, so real quick before we jump into that, can I ask you, as someone who did the whole script reading thing as your job in Hollywood, did you ever get any books that were like either adaptations of books or whatever to read?
Yes.
Okay.
One of them was it was Stephen Ambrose's book about Pegasus Bridge on D-Day. And I had to run. They said, here's the book. We need you to go home right now, read the whole thing. Don't stop for any reason, and then get us the coverage fast, because that was around the time that Band of Brothers had just been purchased and was being developed by Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks, which was a Stephen Ambrose book. And so they sent me home with this other one to see if they wanted to option it for a movie before anybody else picked it up, because it was Ambrose's new book. Yeah, I mean, I've been shocked sometimes to see how many movies have adapted from a novel titled whatever by so-and-so. It's really the lifeblood of Hollywood. So I was just curious.
Not anymore. Now it's all just remakes. But
well, right, now it's eating itself. Right. But I was just curious to find out what both of you thought of, like, you know, your favorite books versus movies, and which one you thought was better.
Okay, so Ready Player One, where we started this.
Okay, I'll bring the Ready Player One.
Okay, I have not seen this movie yet. I know it's fresh out.
Right.
Just now hitting the screens.
Right.
Many of you have probably read this book. I think it's a very controversial book for nerds, much the same way that Big Bang Theory is a controversial TV show for nerds. There's a lot to love here, especially if you grew up playing Atari games, things like that. And you know, Spielberg, even being the heavyweight champion of the movies that he's been in our lives, probably is still going to have a tough time taking that book and making it what it is, for many reasons. Choices he made along the way, and the things that he's got to figure out how to do with this. So I do not envy the maker of that movie. I will try to check it out, hopefully this Friday, and we will see what happens with it. I know that I enjoyed the book. I enjoyed the ride down memory lane, and it was a lot of fun. So.
But is that movie itself, though, sort of the apex of reference culture? Like, if we got to the point where now there's a major motion picture that is based on a book that is all about references to the 80s. That is based
on a motion picture.
Right,
based
right,
on a book.
Right.
That is based on.
Right.
I think that if it walks into that octagon, it's going to have a big old fight on its hand.
Right.
You know, I see all the projections for what this movie does. I try not to look at stuff like that. I like to listen to folks who've seen the movie and hear what they think of it. Any advanced word I've heard on it is that it's good. I mean, it does what it set out to do. It's fine.
Right.
Is what I've heard. For whatever that's worth.
It's fine.
It's fine.
If you want to hear our take on it, it's fine. That's the kind of review you want for your film on opening weekend.
Maybe
that's right.
Like when watching Stranger Things, you know, like you'd say, Barb's fine.
That would be, you know, that would be so great if it said on the poster for like the next week, it was like, it's fine, RetroBlasting.com. That would be awesome.
Some stars.
Yeah. All right, well, let's dig into...
if only we had more books that became movies to talk about.
I know, it's so rare that it happens.
I'll leave it up to you all to start. You know, I know we have a lot to choose from, and we have a lot off the top of our heads that we could talk about as well. So, Melinda, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I think that. Wait, we will get to questions toward the halfway mark. Sometimes Melinda jumps in. I don't know what I'm jumping in on, but anyway. Okay, so I think that there's so many things to choose from when you're talking about what's the best. And I always hate those what's the best questions when it comes to films or books or things like that, because there's so many different types, and it really just depends on what you're in the mood for. But one of the things that I've heard a lot of people talking about or seen a lot of people talking about in the chat is what are some movies that are better than the books?
Right.
And so I was actually earlier today struggling to think of some of those, and just to sort of jog my memory, I ran through some lists on BuzzFeed and all those things, and a lot of people were throwing around things like Jurassic Park and the Princess Bride. I think somebody just said that on here. Jaws is another good one, which I've never read those books, so it's really hard for me to comment, but I can only imagine that a book about Jaws would not hold a candle to the film. Now, someone else may disagree, so again, I haven't read the book. So
is Peter Benchley on the chat right now? I can jump in about Jurassic Park, because I deliberately did not go to see that movie in the summer of '93 because I hadn't read the book. Now, since I've played fast and loose with the rules, but back then I was hardcore about making sure I'd read a book before I saw a movie based on a book. And so I didn't go see the film. Everybody thought I was an idiot for not going and participating in the American entertainment phenomenon that was Jurassic Park.
Did you break that rule for Twilight?
We're going to get to that.
Okay.
So I went and got the book and read it. And I mean, there's no denying that book is a page turner. Like that book, I burned through that book in probably 36 hours. I mean, it was just not nonstop reading, but it captivated me. That's all I wanted to do, was keep reading that book. And I felt genuine tension and excitement reading this book. And it was also a technical book. And I thought that I wasn't going to be able to get past some of the technology and science in it, but he made it accessible. And so I was like, oh, well, I can understand this. I do get it.
Here's the question. Did the book have the annoying kids?
The book had children, but the little boy was the only one of an age where he would do stuff. The little girl was real small. She was almost like right out of toddler age, if I recall. It's been 25 years since I've read the book, but I remember sequences with Ellie Sattler where she was kind of by herself and she was having to leap off rooftops to get away from raptors and stuff, and it was just this high intensity, almost Die Hard type situation.
Well, speaking of Die Hard, in my research that I did you guys, who out there, raise your hands, we'll see you, who knew that Die Hard was a book before it was a movie? I certainly did not. I haven't read it, but now I really just kind of want to, because I'd love to imagine what that would be like.
Right. So back to Jurassic Park.
Sorry, I had to just get that in there. You brought it up.
So anyway, what I'm getting at is, when I saw the movie finally, I saw it in the theater on a re-release in '94, the next summer, and it was enjoyable, but it was not the book. I thought the book was better than the movie, honestly.
Generally, I would think that a book is always going to be better than the movie if you've taken the time to read it, just because it is able to cover things and explain things and connect with you in a way that a film never can. It can tell you subtext and what people are thinking in ways that...
Yes, but there's one example I have coming up where I think the book really needed a movie adaptation to help it out.
Yeah?
Yeah, but I don't want to get into that now.
Okay.
So we'll move on to the next thought.
Aaron.
The next thought. I'm going to go straight to something that was a classic when I was a kid, and that is the Never-Ending Story. We have the wonderful privilege of having both of these things here. But if you guys remember watching this as a kid, which many of us did,
right,
all of the ups and downs and sadness to it, it was definitely something that stuck with me as a movie. And I have not watched it recently to get a kind of contemporary feel for it. But for me, reading the book was kind of nice going back to the book from the movie and filling in the gaps that were there. So I feel like they both kind of stand. I've got that nostalgia love for the movie. And then the book itself was kind of like, oh, so that's more like what was going on and things like that.
Is the scene with Artax as gut-wrenching in the book as it is in the movie?
That scene is always going to be gut-wrenching.
Okay.
There's
what
no
about,
way to save yourself.
is there the cool scene in the book with Atreyu jumping between the two laser beams with the statue?
There is.
They described the statues as being like busty women.
I don't think I highlighted that specific that specific part of the book, but it's funny in this case. I think the movie did a great job of bringing out a lot of these visuals that you're talking about. Not to be too fine of a point on that, but it was the kind of thing where I think those sphinxes were more terrifying to me as a kid because they were right in front of me and visualized. In the book, I think I might have like brushed past some of those scenes without realizing just the whoever was directing it did a good job of kind of letting it get into their nightmares and then drawing that.
Right.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So for me, I think one of the first movies that I had read the books as a kid, like you're saying, and then saw the movies was Lord of the Rings. And I had read those and had my dad read them to me as a kid, and I'd seen all of the animated films and stuff like that. And so I reread the books in anticipation of the films coming out. And I mean, while you're sitting there in the theater, I personally was expecting to be let down because there was so much to cover in those books. But I felt like Peter Jackson did an amazing job, like many people do. And even the parts that he took out, like Tom Bombadil in the first book and stuff like that, and I was a fan of all of that in the book. I might be in the minority on that, but I really liked, people could criticize Tolkien for being a little rambly and wandering, but I kind of liked that because it set a tone in the book. I still feel like the movies were very effective at being interesting, great fantasy adventure films, and they still kept enough of the tone that it felt true to the books. So it's kind of set the bar for me really high for movie adaptations. And so right after that, or around that time, I think the Harry Potter series started coming out as films. And so I read all of the books before I saw the movies, and it really kind of took the punch out of some of the, I won't give away spoilers, but some of the major stuff that happens later in the series. I knew it was coming, and it was just kind of like, I mean, you know what I mean? Like, it just,
Well, the journey for me on that was with the books, and the movies was kind of a victory lap for me, and it was nice to be surprised, because one of the things they did, unlike with Lord of the Rings, is they brought in new directors and new artistic direction and things like that. It was really surprising to see where they went on some of those different, sometimes good, sometimes bad. Just ask me sometime about Deathly Hallows and how that went. But so that was kind of a victory lap, is what I would say, for going through it and seeing what they hit.
Yeah, I had an experience with Harry Potter, which I wrote about on the RetroBlasting Facebook page several years ago, called Harry Potter and the Wand of Mediocrity, where the...
So how did you feel about that?
I don't hate the movies at all. I mean, we have them right here. What I was trying to get at, though, was that the films, they felt like a roller coaster that you thought was for, real action, excitement, and people over 5.5 feet tall. And then when you got to the top of the incline and you started to go down, the roller coaster revealed itself to just be this gentle kind of path. The action never really built to a point where your adrenaline got up in the films. I read the first 4 books, but I felt that they were repetitive. So I might not have been the audience for Harry Potter. Like, as far as Lord of the Rings was concerned, though, the way I used to describe it to people was the books are expert at telling you about the world, and then the Peter Jackson movies are the perfect supplement that tell you expertly about the action. Because Tolkien wasn't always so interested in talking about action scenes and swashbuckling and all that kind of stuff. He was more interested in telling you about what the trees looked like and how often they harvested their crops and all that kind of stuff.
It went a long way to making me feel like I was there, which is a lot of what I love about those books.
Exactly.
Yeah, I feel like the books and the movies for Lord of the Rings, not The Hobbit, but for Lord of the Rings, are equally good. I think they're good companions to one another. The Hobbit, not so much. The Hobbit was a real mess movie-wise. The book is excellent, but
Well, I mean, we kind of knew that The Hobbit was going to be a problem, or at least potentially was going to be a problem before it ever came out, because it, was making a very, very small book into a whole lot of movies. So it just felt like a cash grab from the outset.
Right.
Yeah, for something subtitled There and Back Again, It was there and
Yeah.
there and there and there and there. And
Took a
back
lot
there.
of detours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But still a beloved book. Lots of fun. And I also was looking for Tom Bombadil, and when he wasn't there, one of the magical things that happened with Peter Jackson's treatment of that was I really wasn't as mad.
Yes.
I think we talked about this a few days ago on our podcast, and it was just, to me, the experience was so amazing to see other people enjoying the same story that I'd read a million times, and to have that conversation with people that I considered muggles at the time.
Right. Now, one book that I will tell you, and I know I'm going to get hate for this because it's going to make me seem like some sort of caveman dullard saying this, but okay, so The Count of Monte Cristo, unabridged. I downloaded the Audible book for it, unabridged, and it ends up being something like 24 or 36 hours long. And I was prepared for that because I had just listened to The 7 Pillars of Wisdom by T.E. Lawrence, which was 12 hours long. So,
to be fair, you're looking for really long books to get you through a really long commute.
yes, I'm looking for a good sized book to get me through a commute. I found I picked this book up about 15 years ago and tried reading it, couldn't get through it. So then now I got the audiobook and I'm getting through it, but I'm on like chapter 67. I know that this book was originally written as a series of serials and kind of like a magazine type format. So I get it that he got paid for every single installment, so he padded it out. But
like The Hobbit.
Right, but any movie adaptation of this book, I mean any movie adaptation, is more survivable than this literary experience itself. I'm just saying that. Let me guess, you've read it and you loved it.
No, I just like Alexander Dumas.
Oh, okay.
For lots of reasons.
I just...
Well, I quite enjoyed that particular film. I don't know much about the original book.
Right.
It's not really my thing. I've listened to some of it with you in the car, and it's just not my thing. But God bless you. If you can get through that, go for it.
I'm getting through it, but it's like a hike through the desert. I mean, it's just like
Yeah,
if I hear the
literally.
name Donglar one more time, I'm gonna
I think I'm on hour 40 of the Sherlock Holmes omnibus edition,
right.
which is like 60 hours long or something. It's
Yeah.
insane.
Have you? So you're listening to all the books, and have you watched like the Jeremy Brett?
Along the ones that came on Mystery, a long time ago, I watched like the Basil Rathbone kind of Hound of the Baskervilles kind of stuff, and that's what made me like. I noticed it on my parents' bookshelf after seeing those mystery TV shows and started reading through them, and then that introduced me to all the short stories that were written, just the nice little anecdotes from Watson on what they were up to. This is like a steampunky version of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy for English literature.
Right.
It's really funny because there are so many different incarnations of it now. You have these books, which to me are beloved. They're just a comfortable place. I mean, you can ask people around me. I listen to this stuff while I'm asleep. And then you have the series that have come out in England. Siri that have come out on the BBC, and those are both loved and hated depending on which series it is that you're talking about. And then you have the movies that came out not too many years ago with both good and bad acting and everything else along with it. So this is a case where to me it will always be the book that is the best, because there's something about just kind of stepping out like into a holodeck into 1894 and just seeing how strange and different the world was. Because aside from all the mysteries, we've seen so many TV shows about solving murders and mysteries that a lot of the techniques that Sherlock Holmes uses aren't really going to blow your mind. But the interesting thing is that a lot of those techniques came from this book to begin with. Everything from using casts to find footprints to the fact that the British version of the FBI, their database is called Holmes.
Right.
So it's just a lot of homage that goes that direction. But the TV shows and movies are fun too. I just always kind of run back to Mama to the
Well, so I know people are probably going to roll their eyes when I say this, but it's a good example of, so with Twilight, which I know I'm the only one in the room who likes it, and I don't care. I enjoyed the books. I had read all of the books before I saw any of the movies at all, and to me, especially with the first movie, which is really bad. You heard it.
Come on, you know
first,
that
folks.
Muse song is incredible.
The soundtracks are a whole different thing, and that's a whole other podcast or live stream or whatever. But in terms of the film adaptation of the book, I felt like it was very lacking. I'm not really sure why, because it's a very simple story, but when you watch it, and if you've read the book of something, whether it's this or something else, you know what the characters' motivations are because you've read what's happening in their minds mostly. And so you your brain will fill in the blanks, but if you're watching it with somebody like who has never read Harry Potter, for example, and you've read it and you're both watching the movie for the first time, you may get a lot more out of it than they will because your brain is filling in all that stuff you kind of know about Hermione's character and Harry's character. And that's true in this, in Twilight, very much. So I know what Edward's thinking and I know what Bella's thinking, but they don't really convey that in the film itself. And so someone who's never read the book is just sitting there going, I don't understand why any of these people are doing any of the things they're doing, and I just don't care. And I get that now watching it again with that insight. It's like, yeah, they did a really poor job. I feel like it gets a little bit better as the series goes on, but ultimately I think those books just don't translate all that well into movies because it's an emotional story and it's hard to represent emotions on screen unless you're just doing like the Bridges of Madison County or something, which this is more of an action-y type of movie adaptation. So taking that idea of things that don't convert very well just because of what they are, let's talk about Dune. We've talked about it a lot before in the podcast, but I mean, Dune seems like a very dense text that it would be really hard to adapt into film, and you know the book and the film, Aaron, so I mean, what do you think about that?
I mean, the book is incredible. If you are a fan of that era's science fiction, and I understand that science fiction has not always been the same, and there's your Bradburys, there's all these different Asimov, all these different science fiction writers of the past, and there's a lot of great ones from when we were growing up, like Orson Scott Card, who brought a lot of change into that genre, all the way up till now when there's a lot more action and there's just a ton of science fiction out there for you to read. If you're a completist, then Dune book is where it is. There's, like you were just talking about in Twilight, maybe a more extreme example, there is so much detail in this saga that you watching the movie won't always realize that, you know, they're talking about some thousands of years long program where they were trying to breed specific traits into the human race so that they could survive some massive annihilation. But at the same time, I'm going to go ahead and say I love the movies that were made too for their own reasons. I mean, once you get past certain things like having the voice controlled and voice modulated attack weapon, the movie is very broody and moody, and it feels very Blade Runner-esque, and so it's got a really cool feel to it. And then you get into the Sci-Fi Channel's reproduction of the book, and one of them feels like a play and is very overacted, and the other one is less overacted but a lot more, you know, dramatic. And the special effects were just, they turned it up a couple of notches on those. So I would say if you liked any of those first, go back and read the book. You might be surprised at exactly how or why some of the things happen the way they do, and you may be surprised by people who you think were the heroes who maybe weren't quite as heroic as you thought they were. And you know, vice versa. If you love the book, you know, if you can just kind of put yourself in a place where you realize that they had to make some concessions for the fact that humanity as a whole has not reached a point where it can produce what's described in the book, even with the movies we've been seeing lately, then you might be able to find some enjoyment of just watching some 70s, 80s science fiction wizardry at its worst.
Right.
Best.
Now
Best.
you just mentioned Blade Runner. You've read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, right?
Yes, it's been about 15 years, I think.
Okay, so is the Philip K. Dick novel, how does it stack up to Blade Runner the movie?
I don't want to speak out because it really has been a long time since I've read the book. And for those of you out there who really love Philip K. Dick's work, I don't want to represent this badly, but I don't remember it having a really big impression on me when I read the novella shorter story for that. And that is a good example, and I know this will be a divisive issue, but that is, I think, a good example of where a novel was turned into a movie that just kind of transcended everyone's expectations of what it was going to be about.
Right.
Someone had made a point, I think it was on our announcement, talking about, you know, a lot of times if you pick a book that was sort of underwhelming and make it into a film, that a lot of times that's where you're going to see a big success. I tend to say similar things, like if you take a movie, if you're going to do a remake, if you found a movie that was somewhat mediocre in the past but had some good concepts in it that just weren't able to be expressed at the time, and then you remake that into something amazing, you're going to get a lot less animosity about your film, because you're not trying to remake something like, I don't know, Back to the Future, which, you know, you're never going to be able to top the original. You've already
yeah, you've perfected that, so no sense in trying to.
You can only go down.
Right,
from there.
right,
yeah.
right.
And by the same token, just to add to that, it's another Philip K. Dick, The Man in the High Castle. The novella is great. I mean, I read through the whole thing. It's a very short story. But the TV show, I think, to a lot of people, really, it's 2 seasons long, and it was a very well-written, good drama. There's a lot to get out of it. If you go back and read the book, you'll find you pass through a lot of those plot points very quickly, and they make good companions for each other, because it's like one is a good episode, where the other one, being the TV series, you get to kind of steep in that in that strange world for a little bit longer and see what's going on there.
Right. Now, Melinda, I need to ask you about this. So, Gone with the Wind. You've read it.
I've read it several times.
And you own it.
And I've watched it several times.
Is this one where they are on equal footing?
I feel like they're both very good if you like that kind of thing. There are a lot of differences, because just like with probably Dune and Lord of the Rings, it's a very thick book, as you can see. There's a lot to cover. There's a lot of years that it covers. So there are things that happen. Even the font in that is really small. It is just it's a very dense book. The film is 4 hours long, but it's a lot to go through. So you're going through before the Civil War, all the way through the Civil War to Reconstruction.
Kind of the same problem Dune had, though.
Yeah.
To get it all in there, they had to.
I mean, you've got like whole characters that just don't even appear in the movie, but are they really necessary to the core plot? And probably not. And so, I mean, I definitely think that the film sort of does its own thing, because it was such a major blockbuster at the time when it came out. They went to such great lengths to recreate the burning of Atlanta, and these huge sweeping crane shots that they did just to show the enormity of the death and the destruction of the war. I feel like the movie brings its own thing to it, and that's probably true of some of these other films too. Like, a lot of people have been mentioning To Kill a Mockingbird, and yes, this is the one I got in high school to read it for.
This is the exact same one I got in high school to read too.
I think both of these are really amazing in their own ways. Since we're talking about Southern literature, I think they both bring a lot. The book is just an amazing book about all of these concepts that were talked about, but then the film, you've got Gregory Peck and some just amazing performances, so the film becomes something of its own that's just a little...
And the fact that Harper Lee was intrinsically involved or included in the production of the film, that's got to help somewhat, because she approved Gregory Peck, not literally approved, but she was so happy that he was playing what is ostensibly her father, things like that. Well, that and Gone with the Wind then seem to live in the same world, where the book and the movie go hand in hand as bona fide classics together. I think the vote is still out on this particular one, Patriot Games. I know we're jumping here a little bit, but when you're...
It's the same guy in both, though.
This is the movie edition of the book, but it's not the original cover. But I tried to read this at 14 years old after I had seen the movie. And the movie, as a 14-year-old kid who doesn't know enough about anything, I thought this was a great movie. And then I saw the book, and I tried to read the book, and admittedly, I need to revisit it as an adult, because I walked away from this book going, I couldn't get through it. In fact, my placeholder is still in it from Waterloo Station in 1992. I'll have
Is that
Yeah,
a
this has
receipt
been-
for something?
This has been
It's
the most
a,
fun part.
Calendar?
Yeah.
It's like looking through and finding all these old receipts and all the things I've used for bookmarks throughout.
Yeah.
Oh, I invested in Microsoft. Wow. Maybe
But this is one where I told myself when I put it down, I said, I'm not grown up enough yet to really appreciate this. I remember saying that. I remember saying to myself,
That's not an experience I ever remember having.
Thanks, Doogie Howser.
You're welcome.
So I know that there's some changes to the movie. Like in the movie, he saves a British nobleman, whereas in the book, he ends up saving either the Prince and Princess of Wales or the Queen herself.
And by the way, that's early on. We're not in spoiler territory there.
Right. Yeah, I walked away sort of in a holding pattern because the movie has diminished a little bit for people. They say, oh, Patriot Games is really chintzy. I'm like, oh, really? And then the book is still an X factor for me. I haven't finished it.
Well,
To me, they both have, to be honest.
What's
From
that?
reading it when I was 14
Uh-huh.
and seeing it when I was 14, they both have kind of gotten
Really?
squashed a little bit by a lot of other things that have hit the scene. Not to pick on Clancy at all,
Right.
because he has a huge place in our video games now, apparently.
Right.
Well, so that leads to an interesting thing where you're talking about changes in the movie adaptations of books. There's always minor changes. You have to leave some stuff out, things like that. But what about when they make major changes in the plot? And a good example of that is this, which I really don't mind, but American Gods. I don't know how many of you have been watching the series on TV. I saw the first season. I'm a
Same.
huge fan of this book. Read it a couple of times, and I feel like they're taking. I don't have a real problem with it, but they are changing it quite a bit from the original
Right.
source. And so, I'm assuming that they're doing it because it's a television series and it's just got a little bit, longer period of time that they can sort of play with these things. Neil Gaiman is involved in the sort of production, so I don't have as much of a problem with it, but at the same time, it's like, why do you feel the need to completely change this character? Or, like the Ninja Turtles is another good example. Why do we have to change it so much from the original?
I would say, especially with American Gods, and I've sat through the first season and read the book, and I just recently got the special edition Audible version where if you like this story, they got a full cast to actually act all of the parts out. The TV series is a little insidious in the way that it's changing the plot too. There
Yeah.
are some very obvious ways, and there's some moments, if it's been a little while since you've read it, where you're like, is that a little, that's only a little bit different, but is it different after all? So the part that kind of bothered me the most was that I felt like I wasn't sure if I was remembering it correctly. And that's
Yeah,
a very
and I
Neil Gaiman thing to do to somebody too, by the way. If you're
I had
watching.
reread the book before watching the series just to sort of jog my memory, and when we got to, there was like a one part, and it's not really a spoiler, the main character gets the crap beaten out of him in this scene, and I'm like, I just reread this, I do not remember this happening, and sure enough, they just sort of added this whole extra butt-kicking scene into the thing, and I'm just like, I just don't understand. I mean, I understand why, because it makes for, it's a cool fight scene, but
Yeah, I had the same moment. I was just like, okay, I don't remember.
I bet it's
like,
the
this
literal
is the
same
part
moment.
where that happens, and then I'm like, that didn't wait. But yeah, it's okay.
And yeah, people are talking about Rambo. First Blood is a great example of that, and we talked about it in our Rambo cartoon video,
Right.
where you've got the book, which has a very specific tone and a story that's pretty dark, doesn't end super happy for the main character, and then they did the movie adaptation, which I understand why Stallone and other folks involved made the decision to not have Rambo's character killed off in the movie. But then, as the films go on, you get further and further away from that original character. So that's definitely a series that has completely just gone off the rails, and they're just doing their own thing with that.
Someone
And-
out there screaming the Bourne Identity as an example.
Yeah,
Oh,
sure.
Jason Bourne.
I should remember that. I have a story about that. You go
you?
ahead first. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
do you
Are
need
you
to go
gonna
get
go
it?
run off and get?
I can certainly go run off and get it if you'd like. How about I go get the Bourne Identity?
All
Be
right.
right back.
Well, in the
We
meantime.
always have to have Michael leave to go. Oh wow, he's literally leaving.
Yeah, I just heard him start his Jeep. Whoa. Okay. Maybe it was a motorcycle. I'm not entirely sure.
Could be.
Yeah.
And then like some club music starts playing.
I wonder what kind of a funny story you could tell about Jason Bourne.
Me?
Yeah, well, yeah, you. We'll
Not
go ahead
me.
and make this all about you. Yes.
No.
What funny story can you tell me about Jason Bourne? You know what? We'll save it for the podcast. You just think about it. You write it down.
Michael has funny stories about almost everything. You know, we're in an airport. He's wearing a hat. He starts telling a funny story about a hat, and then suddenly you're just talking about.
Jason Bourne.
Could be. You could lead anywhere at any time.
Well, the reason why I brought that up for Jason Bourne, and Michael will just have to guess what I say right now because he decided to leave.
We'll never tell him.
Yeah, he's probably about halfway to the gas station at this point.
Okay.
Was because when I was taking a long driving trip, one of my old jobs required me to drive all over the place, and I bought a abridged copy of Jason Bourne stories, and in listening to it, I was immediately just kind of blown away by how different it was than the Jason Bourne movies that I had seen
How
up to
so?
that point. Okay, this is just my impression at the time. A poorly written attempt at a James Bond story.
Oh.
Ouch. Just.
So you're saying the movies are better?
Yeah, I think they took an opportunity there to take not a B, but like a C rated. So, and I'm sure these stories are well beloved, so I don't mean any hate in the wrong directions, but they took something that was not necessarily written very tightly and very well and didn't hold up well at all with today's world. And they threw a totally cool idea at it. I mean, they brought so much cinematography into it. Michael's back, but now he looks like he's making a pizza.
So one thing I will sort of slightly change the topic because someone was talking about Alice in Wonderland. I love Alice in Wonderland, and it's actually Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. And the Disney movie is no, but there was a television adaptation of Alice in Wonderland in the 80s, which I will put somewhere in a link somewhere, because it was absolutely spot on, exact adaptation, and really, really good. Scott Baio was in it, weirdly. Telly Savalas was the Cheshire Cat.
He's funny.
Yeah.
So I couldn't find the books. I did have the original Bourne trilogy in paperback, but I couldn't find it. So sorry for all the footsteps and looking around. You know, leave it to the imagination. But
He
here's
stabbed a guy with a pencil. It was amazing.
here's the movie set. You've read the Bourne novels, right?
I listened to an abridged version. You were still in the Jeep driving to get some soda or something. But yeah, I read like an abridged version of it. I felt like it didn't hold up. I felt like it was a little dated.
Yeah, it's very dated. I bought all three after I had loved the films, anticipating that I would love the books because the films were so excellent.
No, sir.
I started reading the books, and I was just like, oh my gosh, like this guy, it's very not late Cold War, but sort of mid to late Cold War setting, and the protagonist, Jason Bourne, he's just a jerkwad the whole book. I mean, and none of the other character motivations make sense. It kind of reminded me of 3 Days of the Condor, where Faye Dunaway just, even though she's being held hostage by Robert Redford, she just gives it up to him anyway for reasons. Like it doesn't. That's
the problematic side of those books.
It was the 70s.
Yeah, it was just,
people did a lot of weird things. There were drugs involved.
There were parts of that book where I almost was certain that they just went ahead and used it to make the Bourne identity, and then also used all the stuff they couldn't to make Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Right.
Did you ever get that feeling?
Yes.
There were some weird parallels between the two.
But I felt like the books were much improved on in the Matt Damon starred series. So the first three, I wasn't as wild about the offshoot fourth one. I didn't think it held up as much. So.
He's always
Is that
dogging
the
on
one
Hawkeye.
without Matt Damon?
No, I'm sorry, I don't even count that one. That's the Bourne Legacy. I'm referring to Jason Bourne, the one.
I liked it.
Okay.
Matt Damon was in it. I liked it.
Did everyone spend a bunch of money to save him?
No, it wasn't Saving Private Ryan.
Oh. He's always getting rescued.
Hey, Michael, a lot of people were making comments about, are you wearing high heels? Because you had a lot of clickety-clack when you were...
It's called hardwood floors, so there's hardwood flooring on the steps.
He is actually wearing heels.
I bet you could tell us the exact make of those fine Dutch
Do a
you've got
high kick.
on.
Show us your feet.
Oh, those look vintage.
Now, one it's hardwood floors. So one that I
like Huckleberry Finn's dad, he's hammered a nail into the bottom of his shoe.
So one that I brought, I couldn't find the book copy. I read it. Was The Name of the Rose, which was a medieval monastery mystery movie starring Sean Connery and Christian Slater. But it was originally a book by Umberto.
Is that little bitty Christian Slater?
Yep.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's like one of his first roles.
Baby Christian Slater.
But it was originally a book by Umberto
Before the
Eco.
Legend of Billie Jean, even.
Right.
Please continue, Michael.
So I read the book in high school because I love the movie, and I was like, oh my gosh, this book is on my reading list for high school, you know, English lit or not English lit, but literature or whatever. So I picked it up. And that was a moment where I realized that there was going to be a certain amount of evolution in my intelligence because of my education, and then there was going to be a moment where I couldn't follow people who were going to be smarter than me forever.
But what I'm hearing is that you were already very smart, but
No.
you realized that you would eventually be smarter, and that there would always be people smarter than you.
But I knew, like,
It's an incredible amount of self-awareness.
Like I
amazing.
knew that I was going to one day understand this book if I ever bothered to pick it back up again. And I'm confident that I will enjoy this book now that I've, you know, gotten older. This book, on the other hand, which I had to get through for a class, so I had committed to it, I realized I will never be this smart, and I will never get this book. And there are people who are just
Challenge accepted.
smarter.
Now I want to read it.
Yeah, there are people who are just smarter than me, and wow. So I embrace the movie a lot because the movie.
What was the name of the rose? Or is that a spoiler?
Genevieve.
I don't even remember at this point. I don't even remember.
This is a Sandman, Neil Gaiman Sandman shirt. Someone asked. It's from the issue Ramadan.
Now there are two sort of outliers on the table here that we brought, and I wanted to have Aaron start. We picked two comic/graphic novel books. We didn't want to get into comic books too much because a lot of comic book movies are adaptations of decades worth of comic book mythos for a character like Superman or Spider-Man. They don't always literally translate things, but we found that two were worthy to be in this discussion, so I want Aaron to start with his.
Sure. This is volume 2 of a mini volume set of something called Akira. And this is a movie that I saw, I don't know, quite by accident back in the 80s, maybe early 90s when it was shown on television for some whatever reason. And it's just this amazing Japanese story having to do with, like many of them, the destruction of Tokyo and then the development of psychic powers and other powers in, you know, the people involved in like a military sort of way. The reason that I brought this one up is because going from the movie to the book, it's this very strange moment where you're reading through the comic and you realize everything in the movie is almost exactly like it was in the comic, except they've cut bits and pieces out, because obviously if you've got something this thick and there's, you know, 9 copies of it or more, you can't get that into a 2-hour movie.
Right.
But I'll be darned, it looks like, it looks like it was
Golly gee
drawn
willikers.
by the exact same person as drew the movie to actually animate it. It just looks like stills from the movie in the book. So it was a very impressive. There's very much a bit of this, and I think only the movie would win for conciseness.
Conciseness.
And then the books would, you know, win on details.
Right. The one we have here on the edge of the table is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I was hesitant to actually pull it into the conversation. However, the first live-action movie from 1990 really follows the major beats of the original comic book, down to the gritty aesthetic and the end fight on a rooftop. Now, it does sort of create a compromise between what were then the popular cartoon Ninja Turtles by pulling in those elements, the pizza, the multicolored headbands, but the actual beats of the characters, for the most part, follow the events of the first comic. They pull in April O'Neil from the second comic book, and then the farmhouse stuff with the antique shop and everything comes from a later comic book from the original run. It's interesting to see how, while not as accurate as Akira was to its adaptation as far as beat for beat, it tried to find the most important beats throughout the story's run and bring them all together in one movie experience.
Well, and Akira had a bit of an advantage because they were drawing, which I know is technically in some ways harder.
Right.
But you can, if you take the time, you can control a lot of those details.
Yeah.
That's true, because when I watched that movie, the Ninja Turtles movie, there's something about it with these guys in these big suits that you know that they're guys in big suits, and it just, when you're reading it on the page in this book, it's a lot easier to take, okay, these are turtles, but I'm going to accept that, and then I can just go with it, and it feels very gritty.
Yeah.
The movie feels more cartoony. It feels kind of like a spoof of this to me. I mean, I'm not trying to criticize it. They did the best they could with it, but
well, we know the book would have probably missed younger children,
right?
For reasons of violence and other mature themes. The movie was definitely thinking about selling some toys and some other cartoons. So
yeah. So I guess now we'll just start taking questions at this point.
A lot of people are talking about James Bond.
Oh, here's the man to talk about James Bond. This guy's read every single Ian Fleming novel there is.
Not every single.
We're going to do another show dedicated.
Oh, to Bond? Okay,
so
yeah.
We've had a lot of questions about Bond.
We're going to be doing.
I think that would be worth it because there are still a few books I need to finish. Some I'd like to revisit just to have an excuse to reread them because they're great.
No, we're going to be doing a whole live stream about Bond in the near future. We've been planning that, but we just have to get a few things in order first. But talk a little bit about the books if you don't mind.
Just to keep it very, very brief, the books are they're definitely a trip back in time. And I am not as familiar with British culture as I have become recently, listening to more and more of the sort of the original detective novel with Sherlock Holmes. I don't know. I don't want to waste too much.
Okay. We'll save that for the James Bond live stream, which will be happening very soon. So
I can sort of talk about Stephen King. There's a ton there.
Almost brought him up earlier.
Yeah, there's, a lot of people talk about Misery being like probably the best. I would say it's, if not the best, it's definitely one of the best adaptations of his work onto the screen. And I almost feel like that movie is better than the book by a hair. But a lot of his stuff is so esoteric that it's hard to make it feel scary when it's on the screen. Like, a good example of that is, what's the one with the cars coming?
Christine?
Not Christine.
No, that was Maximum Overdrive.
Maximum Overdrive, which feels goofy as a movie, but it's scary in the book. Like, it's... There's
always a set of his books that are amazing books and terrible movies. And it's not necessarily his fault they're bad movies. It's probably shared, who knows, but they just don't come out. And then there's some of his stories some of the ones he wrote under a pseudonym, like Green Mile.
Like the Richard Bachman stuff?
Yeah, Richard Bachman stuff. If you go back and read those books after watching the movie or before, I found similar to Philip K. Dick. I was a little underwhelmed by the book, but the movies were really transcendent. Green Mile sticks with you for a long time.
The Green Mile certainly does. Probably not the Langoliers.
No. No, that goes in the other one, but Shawshank.
I kind of like the Langoliers.
Is that the one where Balky gets eaten by an alien at the end of on an airplane tarmac?
I love that movie. And the special effects are terrible.
I watched it one day at home. And
Don't be ridiculous.
And then I made Trish sit down and watch it with me later.
Listen, I love Under Siege 2 Dark Territory.
Is that a book?
No. But I'm just expressing the kind of movie that I like should tell you the fact that I like the Langoliers.
The Langoliers
not a high standard.
With a very mysterious tone.
Yes.
And then it just turns into a pop-up book.
It's so weird. I really love Stephen King. I don't think I've ever read any of his stuff that I don't like, although I do really love the Bachman books, and I love his really just hardcore, violent stuff that he writes that probably wouldn't adapt well to film. So, I don't know.
There's a twisted to him. There's like a twisted thing that will make you feel like something in the world is spoiled and wrong, and it's you can smell it and it's getting into you when you're reading these books. And he's like one of the only authors that does that you feel like you're just corrupting or something is as you're reading.
Right.
And that really almost never comes through in the movies.
Right.
Stephen King is like heavy metal. He's like the book version of heavy metal.
Stephen King is like the wind in July.
Someone wants to know, Cthulhu Chow wants to know, what are your thoughts on the return of Soup's classic costume in Action 1000?
I'm over the moon about the return of Superman's actual outfit, because I know some people love to make that old tired joke that he wears his underwear outside his pants. But the fact is that those were like, you know, strongman weightlifter trunks of the early 20th century. They were not meant to be underwear. And
from an art perspective, it, you know, when you're drawing someone in action poses, it's very helpful to be able to break up the trunk part of your body, this pelvic part that twists in different, and then the legs. So that was, I think, the purpose of sort of breaking that up with color to sort of make it more dynamic looking. And I mean, if you're wearing a giant body condom, it probably is helpful to break it up a little bit, because it just looks weird when you see, like, Star Trek Next Gen is a great example of what it looks like when you just wear one color bodysuit. You know, it's just weird looking. Yeah, and I always thought it was strange as a child growing up, because I had blue and red Superman growing up, and I had gray and blue Batman. And I liked the fact that they had that consistency. And Wonder Woman had the same consistency. But then you get some guy like the Flash, and you want to look at him and go, could you put something on there? It feels wrong. Yeah. Like, we shouldn't be seeing this.
Well, and with Superman, you're being an artist. You know, when you learn to draw human figures and things, a lot of times you worked from a model. I'm wondering if back when Superman was initially created, if the models that they had available probably would have been strongmen wearing the trunks and everything else. To work with
probably to draw Superman. Yeah. I mean, it probably does sort of mirror that a little bit. Yeah. Good point.
Any other questions on the chat?
There's a lot of stuff on the chat. Someone says Stephen King is a twisted human being. Somewhere in Time.
Oh, the Christopher Reeve movie with, was that Jane Seymour?
Jane Seymour, I believe, yeah.
I haven't read the book. I've seen the movie, of course. Excellent film.
They said Star Trek V was much better as a book than a movie.
There's always the book adaptations of movies.
Yeah, I mean, we're
going to have the reverse version of this show next time. It'll just be what movies
then the movie is always better than the book.
Well, not to put too fine a point on it, but Aaron actually makes it a point to read the novelizations of movies almost sometimes without even seeing the movie. Like,
that's what I did for Force Awakens. That had a lot to do with the fact that I was traveling, couldn't see it when it came out, and so I saw the book came out on not Audible at that point. It was on Amazon, and so I bought it and started reading it while I was traveling, and then saw the movie after. And
I didn't even know until I met you that they even still made book adaptations of movies.
They used to do it all the time.
They used to when we were kids. Like, I remember reading one. I think it was for Gremlins.
I think I read the Star Trek V book, and I think he's right.
I have Star Trek's 1, 2, and 3 novelizations. I have, of course, the Star Wars, the first 3. You can hear Obi-Wan Kenobi refer to a duck in the original Star Wars, and Luke Skywalker actually says, "What's a duck?" You know, there's some interesting little things going on in those films. I can't see that. I can't read that.
What about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Color Classics book?
Color Classics book. Which one is that? Because that's not the Archie comics. That's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Adventures. Oh, you're talking about, that's the Color Classics book. That's what I was referring to earlier, was the movie from 1990 is a live-action adaptation of a lot of the events of the Ninja Turtles comics, and that's what this is in this volume of the original comics for Ninja Turtles.
Someone's talking about reading the last Starfighter novelization.
Well, I would like to read that one.
Yeah, that would be cool. I have a number of them.
Flight of the Navigator. Is there a novelization?
I'm sure there is. One of the ones I found most interesting was Raiders of the Lost Ark, because the author, having no frame of reference and not knowing pop culturally where the character was going to go, he has all the characters refer to him in the book as Jones. So there's very little Indy or Indiana. It's just Jones, Dr. Jones, 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 Jones. And in the narrative, the descriptions say Jones moved to, you know, the edge of the wall or whatever. It's not Indy.
Well, and the fun thing about the Star Wars ones is that while we can never really be sure that we're going to get the actual directing notes or any of the revisions that went into writing the story, a lot of times in writing the book and trying to have it ready by deadline, which they didn't for the most recent one, it just came out last month, you get sort of what the advanced galleys were sent to the writer who was tasked with writing this novelization. You get some of those things that don't always get cut out in the editing process. So there are times when there are just in between the scenes from the movie, you will get other scenes that add just a little color or a little velocity to the scene that you're about to go into that can really change how you feel about the next one.
Right.
You know, a lot of the best example I could just give is just the mention in the first book of some of the training Rey may or may not have gotten in the time before the whole adventure started.
Right.
It's not necessarily apparent in the movie, but it definitely helps when she picks up the controls to a ship and knows exactly what to do.
Right. So, is that where she's training with that simulator in Force Awakens? Yeah.
I was leaving him a little bit more to read, just a little bit.
Right, right.
If they wanted to.
Right.
Someone was mentioning the Phantom of the Opera book, which was in I can't remember what year, but I have read it actually by Gaston Leroux, I think. And then there was the Lon Chaney movie. There's been a number of films made about that. And then, of course, there's always the Andrew Lloyd Webber production, which I know every single word.
Was that a musical?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you want me to sing it to you?
Sure.
I think the first words are Lot 665 then. But anyway, so yeah, that's another one which has changed tremendously over time. I think the one with Lon Chaney back in the day, the film, did change the ending, and it changed the tone quite a bit from the book because they were doing that whole monster movie type of thing, and it just feels like a standard, I'm a monster, but of course that particular character was nothing like that in the book, so... Right. Yeah.
So we put it to you, you know, what are the films that you think are better than the books they came from, and what are the ones where the books, you know, held their own and the films just, you know, went into the dustbin of history?
Bram Stoker's Dracula. Someone just...
Book.
Yeah.
100%.
Although...
Watchmen, book to the end. Watchmen's so much fun, though. That's a hard one to pick.
When it comes to Dracula, though, Nosferatu has an interesting history. The original F.W. Murnau silent movie was supposed to be a Dracula adaptation, and then they were sued by Bram Stoker's people, and so they had to rename it.
Bram Stoker's people would prefer the Gary Oldman film.
Right. They just prefer the check being written.
Okay.
So they said, oh, his name is Count Orlok. But if you actually watch the movie, they didn't change the story. You're actually getting a pretty good adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. So, and it's actually genuinely scary even now.
V for Vendetta?
V for Vendetta. I haven't read the book, seen the movie a bunch of times.
That is another one that like, I think Dune or something, it's not a novel, it's a graphic novel. But the book is great. If you liked the actors that were in the movie, then the movie is terrific. I could definitely see how people who love the book would watch that movie and just see Wachowski brothers, what had they done to this thing, and just be totally turned off. That movie has actually gotten better to me as I've watched it more and more.
That movie has some beautiful sequences, and I've always liked that movie for its editing, and it's a rare thing to me these days is the way that movie still has that classic build where you get to this point where the adrenaline kicks in. It's what, to me, Harry Potter's film series did not have. It knows how to build tension and excitement.
The Godfather, someone's pointing out, I actually think that movie is better than the book.
I haven't read the books.
I'm ignorant on that front, so.
Well, it's not your.
I'm not really into mob movies.
The thing that makes that really hard is that, especially the first Godfather movie, is a tour de force of filmmaking.
That's why I'm saying that.
So it's just like, okay, so if you love the book, you're always going to love the book, but if you love film, then you're going to watch that one at some point just to see how it was done at that time.
Right. I've been told we have 60 seconds left. First of all, I want to say that we've got. We're going to re-up the Dune podcast from the Dreamland podcast soon. That was just a little technical thing, but we're going to have that up for you. I know some people have been asking questions about that. I want to thank Aaron and Melinda, both from the Dreamland podcast, for taking the time to do this discussion with me. Thank you.
We're so busy talking the rest of the time.
And lastly, I want to let you all know that the next RetroBlasting feature, which is coming down the pipeline very soon, is a two-parter. It's going to be about Chuck Norris's Karate Commandos. So look for part part 1 here in the next week or so. I'm working hard on that one. Is there anything you both want to say about upcoming podcast stuff?
No, you said it all so well.
I'm actually in the process, well, not right in this moment, but as soon as I'm done, I'm going to go edit some podcast stuff, and I'm going to have a couple of podcasts coming out to you, I think, next week, so look out for that. And yeah, that's what's going on. Check out our Dreamland podcast page over at retroblasting.com/Dreamland.
It's a good way to spend a commute, especially when you don't have to hear your own voice in it. Like, I get to plug in and get surprised by the dream.
What you guys don't know is that sometimes he monologues for 2 or 3 hours, records it, then plays it back in the car while he's driving. I've heard some of these. They're pretty enlightening.
That's not what I meant. What I meant is that it's a nice surprise to be able to plug in and find out that the Dreamland podcast has a new episode, and I didn't know what it was about, and I get to experience that hour.
Yeah, thank you.
You know, so. All right, guys. Thanks so much for being here. We're going to let you get back to your Saturday. Thanks for joining us, and you'll see us.
Happy April Fool's Day.
You'll see us on the podcast, and you'll see us in Chuck Norris's Karate Commandos Part 1 coming soon. See you guys.
You shall not pass.
That's Gandalf.
I know.